a school social worker and therapist. She has extensive experience in supporting children, families, and communities. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she has taken the next step in her career by opening her private practice, Bridging the Gap Services. That's why she left us. When she left, I almost told her she couldn't leave. When she told us she was leaving the school and told us about some of the things that she was endeavoring to do, she left with our blessing, because we love to see our sisters grow and bloom, and she's done just that. And so I'm going to ask her to come forward and come before you in her own way. Mauri?
Good morning. I am happy to be here. First Lady, that's what I endearingly call her. My husband teases me about it, but she knows how I feel about her, so if she calls me, I'm coming if I can. But yes, I am happy to be here. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I have experience working in a variety of different settings, a lot of which has been centered around like children and schools and things like that. For the past year and a half, almost 2 years, I guess, I have launched my own private practice. It's a group practice. I think I have like 10 to 12, maybe 13 therapists now in the practice. We are in a couple of schools in Pittsburgh Public School District. So I am happy just to see the growth that is happening. Mental health it's important to me. It's valuable. I know I may be biased because I'm a therapist, but I like to think I became a therapist because I see the necessity and the essentials in terms of the importance of paying attention to your mental health, caring for your mental health. So I am going to present to you today a presentation, Being in Position for Restoration. So I know the theme of the conference is restoration, which is I feel like very timely during these times that we are in currently. There are a lot of people who are struggling. I know struggle isn't new, but there just seems to be a weight or a heaviness around the country, around the world, in our communities and our families. So it's important that we are able to have a certain perspective, be in a certain position, especially as women of faith, people of faith, and knowing that even though there are hard times and there are struggles, and we may be struggling, the people around us may be struggling, that God is there to restore us so that we can continue on and do the things that we are here to do. So, I do have a presentation, so I'm going to look at my presentation. Hopefully you guys are able to see it too. Is it up? Great. All right, perfect. So you can go to the next slide, to the agenda. So we will be covering mental health. What is mental health? We'll be talking about self-care. We will talk about what it means to be in position. We're going to talk about barriers to restoration. And then we're going to talk a little more about self-care and some final reflections. I do like to make my presentations interactive and engaging a little bit because I don't want to be the only person speaking, and I think it just helps with internalizing and really holding in the information that's being provided. So we'll also have a little bit of that too. And please do write down any questions that you may have. And even if we can't get to all of them, I'll answer for the note cards, and I don't know, we'll find a way to make sure that the questions that weren't answered are answered as well. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So what is mental health? Can anyone tell me in their own words what they believe mental health is? being emotionally balanced. Thank you. And then, did you have something you wanted to share on what mental health is? Your mindset? Yes. Yes, thank you. So, our definition I have here is a state of well-being in which we as people can cope with stresses of daily life, and we maintain positive, healthy relationships. We are achieving our full potential. So it encompasses a range of aspects, and this includes the following. So our emotional well-being, our psychological well-being, our social well-being, and our cognitive well-being. So I think here what's important to note is that God created us as interconnected beings. So we are not just one thing, right? We have our mind, we have our body, we have our spirit, and then even within that, we have different aspects and parts of us. So when we think about all that makes up who we are as people, it's important to know that we cannot just pay attention or give intentionality to caring for just certain parts of who we are. So when we think about our life domains, we have physical, we have our social, we have our financial, we have our spiritual, but oftentimes what I see is that people will put their emotional and mental well-being on the back burner. And I think that's for a variety of reasons. I think that there's a lot of stigma that comes around like our mental health and emotional health, where we feel like, if we are, admitting that we're struggling or that we're hurt, that we're angry, that we're sad, that we're afraid, that then we may be weak, right? Some of us may be too afraid or feel unsafe to express those more vulnerable emotions because of maybe certain households that we grew up in or certain things that we have endured in our life. And sometimes we just don't have enough time to pay attention to how we're doing emotionally, how we're doing mentally. So we're so worried about prioritizing, for me personally, on a day-to-day basis, I have 4 kids who are 9, 7, 6, and then I have a 1-year-old. So on a day-to-day basis, God bless me, yes. So on a day-to-day basis, I am worried about, who's waking up on time, go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, let's get ready for school, we need to pack your lunch, we need to, get you on the bus on time. And oftentimes I have to remind myself to slow down, right? And check in with myself to see how I'm feeling, how am I doing, right? If I feel like my kids are getting on my nerves, why am I so edgy? What's going on in my world that's making me more susceptible to being triggered in that way? So anyways, the important thing to note here is that you have to remember that you have different parts and aspects of you. And again, I may be biased here, but I do believe that at the center of those different parts of yourself is your mental health and how you are doing. You can experience the best of things, you can experience the worst of things, but if you have a certain perspective that isn't going to be helpful towards you, if you're not able to hold a certain kind of mindset, right? If you're not able to have a certain kind of ability to cope with how you're doing or cope with the life stresses, then it makes all the difference, right? On the other side of that, if you do have a way of being self-aware, being emotionally aware, if you have your coping strategies, if you have your ways in making sure you're taking care of yourself and staying ahead of you experiencing burnout or becoming, very angry or whatever it may be, then you're able to have more of a capacity and tolerance for all of the curveballs that life can throw at you. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about how mental health and faith, how they connect with each other. So mental health is a vital part of restoration. Something that I think a lot of people also lose sight on as Christians, people of faith, is that God cares about our emotional and about our psychological well-being. I think that we oftentimes will take different, more pressing matters to God, things that seem more urgent, and things that may be, a request that is easy to see on a surface level. So, if you are experiencing a sickness, or if you have a loved one that's sick, or if you're having a financial hardship, or, if you are even just thinking about, how can I make it through financially day to day, or whatever it may be. Those things, I think it's easier for people to think like, oh, these are the things I'm coming to God about. These are the things that I'm praying about. But something that God does care about is your emotional well-being and how you're doing. There are so many times in the Word of God that he mentions the heart and the mind, right? How we're doing it within ourselves. But for some reason, we as people, again, we kind of ignore that part of ourselves, right? How are we doing emotionally and mentally? What usually gets in the way of us experiencing restoration in God is our mental and emotional state. So when you have a certain mental and emotional state that is unable to keep a certain perspective. So I like to think of the glass half empty and half full. So this is something I often see with people that I work with. When they are perseverating on the negative outcomes, when they're perseverating on the wrongs that have been done to them and so forth, then it brings your spirit down. It brings your mood down. And when you're down, then that affects the way that you're approaching a situation. That affects the clarity of mind that you could or could not have. It affects the way that you can problem solve your way out of something. It affects the way that you can accept that someone has done you wrong or you haven't received something, but it's okay because you know who your God is, right? So when you're able to keep a certain perspective mentally, when you're able to be in a certain emotional and mental state, it allows you to power forward and be able to withstand the hard times. Next slide, please. So we are going to talk about next the mental health, in terms of mental health, the signs of what it means to struggle with mental health. Before we dive into the symptoms of struggling with mental health, I do want to point out that your mental health should be viewed the same way as your physical health. Oftentimes when we hear mental health, people think about, someone who may be severely struggling with depression, anxiety, or like schizophrenia, and OCD, and many of the other diagnoses that, as clinicians, we have a big book for. But when we think about our mental health, the lens that I want you to keep in mind as we're going through this presentation is that your mental health just means the state that you are in mentally and emotionally, right? So it's the same way as your physical health. You can either be in good physical health or you can be in not so good physical health, and then there's some in-betweens, right? And the goal of your physical health is that when you recognize that something's off, so if you recognize like, oh, I've been having a lot of headaches lately, or I noticed that my blood pressure has been high, or my eyes, it's been really blurry, I haven't been able to see well, then what do? You go to a provider, you try to figure out what is the source of that, and then you treat it, target it, so that you can improve. Your mental health is the same. When you are able to recognize your symptoms of your mental health struggling or your mental health being strained, then you are better able to get ahead of it so that it doesn't become a bigger issue, which oftentimes when it does become a bigger issue, that is when we see those diagnoses of depression, anxiety, and all the other things. So here I have listed are some signs of your mental health may be struggling. Lack of motivation, isolation, not wanting to really be around people, spending time with people, or if you're present in the room, you're really not present, you're not there, you're kind of, just doing your own thing. Having trouble focusing, concentrating, changes in your eating or sleeping habits. So if you're starting to eat more, you're starting to eat less. If you're sleeping more, sleeping less. Feeling constantly overwhelmed. Crying spells, you're crying a lot more. Having excessive worry, so having certain thoughts that you're perseverating on, things that you're worrying about. And then some some serious ones, more serious ones, is self-harm, so either the thoughts or the actions of, and then also suicidal thoughts, plans, and/or actions. Some other signs or symptoms that I haven't included on this list include irritability. I think that's a big one, right? Feeling on edge, not being able to concentrate, not being able to have hope, not being able to engage in certain things that you used to enjoy. So those are signs of struggling, that your mental health may be on the brink of struggling. At this time, if you guys can, just kind of do like a turn and talk. If you can find someone, or it could be a few of you, who just share. I'll give you guys about 2 minutes. What are some of your personal signs that you are aware of, that you know that your mental health may be struggling? Twenty more seconds. All right, when you guys are ready, I would love for a few people to share out some of their responses. All right, so, yes, ma'am. Sorry, yeah, yeah, can we? For those of you who are sharing out, this is the microphone. Sorry to make you guys get up.
If you want to come up and you don't have a loud voice like some, you're going to have to come up here. This only goes but so far, okay?
Good morning, everybody. As she was describing some of the symptoms of depression, I was sitting here thinking, and I'm not no therapist, and I don't even claim to be one. But I was thinking, I know some signs of depression. And so she was going through them. I said, everyone that she hit, I know someone that falls into all of these categories. And I was saying, I thought that person was in depression, but how do you deal with that person that you know or you feel that is in depression, and they may not even know it, or if they do, they don't want to admit it. And then the other thing is, sometimes it's easier to see in someone else and not in yourself. So I see it in someone that's very close to me. But also, on the tip is like whenever you become concerned or overwhelmed, that's where I fit in. I don't have all these, like, don't want to engage in social activity, don't want to be around people, don't sleep a lot. I don't have all those, but just being concerned and overwhelmed to the point where I ain't letting myself go down with them. But it's just at the tip, and I want to know what you could possibly do to help this person. And like I said, I think they are, but I don't even know if they know they are or if they're in denial.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I would, if you don't mind, writing down that question, because that is a good, on your note card, that is a good question for me to answer at the end. But you bring up some very good points, especially in that we oftentimes may struggle with seeing our own symptoms. And we can probably see it easily in other people, but, with ourselves. Even for me recently, it took speaking with one of my clients to realize, like, I noticed that I've been snacking more. And I was like, I've been wanting a lot more treats or like snacks. And then one of my clients said something about stress eating, and then it dawned on me. I was like, yes, Mauri, you are stress eating, so you need to slow down and also deal with your stress. Or even like on a personal level, with my one pregnancy, I didn't realize that I was experiencing like postpartum or whatever it may have been, depression, but it took me like months for me to realize that, even as someone who helps other people with their mental health. So we'll talk about ways that we can slow down our mind and our process so that we can be aware of what's happening internally within us, inside of us. One more person, do you want to share what are your signs that your mental health may need some attention? Sorry. You could go. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the nutshell, I would say, of this presentation, right, is how do we recognize our mental health struggles, right? What are some practical things that we can do, especially if we're looking at it through the lens of our faith and Christian walk, and going to God constantly, knowing that He is there always to restore us, right? We don't have to wait until things are big and bad and ugly. Like, God cares about those little moments where we're feeling anxious. I actually think he prefers, just like, with your own, if you do have children, like you prefer if your kids come to you when things aren't so bad. Like if they're having a little trouble or if they're having, issues with X, Y, and Z. But once they're waiting until it's like ugly, you're like, why didn't you come to me? I want to help you. And I really truly believe God as our Father, he's the same way. So like just sharing that moment with him and recognizing your anxiety and being able to then, because you're coming to him, right? God cares about us. As the word says, a broken and a contrite heart, he won't despise, he won't turn away from. So we're able to be vulnerable enough, open enough, and humble enough to come to him and say, hey, I'm feeling anxious right now. Then that's when he, reciprocates and he gives us something in exchange. So thank you for sharing that. And then Dr. Herring, you had, what are your signs of struggling mentally? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that kind of ties into your comment, right? Is like, what do you do when you can recognize that, when you're experiencing it like for your husband on his end, right? And then for you, without going into too much detail, like, but how long does it take you to even recognize, like, oh, wait a minute, I'm masking, I'm putting on this face for the outside world, but in my home, like, I'm struggling, right? I'm being snappy. So again, it just speaks to the importance of like the awareness of knowing. So that's something I would encourage people to do, is just take some time. Self-check-ins are great. I feel like you should always be checking in with yourself. You should have check-ins that you're doing daily, and then you should also schedule some more in-depth check-ins with yourself, maybe once a month or whatever it may be. But the more you're able to learn yourself and to know yourself, because we're not really taught this, especially in the Black community. We're not taught how to tend to ourselves emotionally and mentally. And a lot of times it's because we're taught to be resilient. You have to figure it out. You have to push forward. You just have to overcome. You have to do the thing. You have to show up. You can't say anything. Watch your mouth. Like, you can't, it just goes on and on. So in order to reverse some of that, and I am happy that the topic of mental health is becoming more prevalent nowadays, and even like bringing someone into a conference like this to talk about mental health just proves that. So checking in with yourself, building up your ability to know you, right? So that you can more quickly pinpoint, like, hold on, like the needle is moving, I'm going on the other side, let me do my X, Y, and Z things, which is the self-care piece that we're going to talk about. What do I need to do to get back in the center, to ground myself? And I saw one more hand up. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I truly believe that, the saying that the mind is the battlefield. I truly believe that the enemy, the devil, knows that if he can keep us in emotional and mental turmoil, then he has us, right? It keeps us, it steers us completely away from the will of God, the purpose of God, right? It completely steers us away from the whole purpose of God, which is restoration, right? That's the whole, especially since, Adam and Eve, the fall of man, like, God immediately put in a plan to restore us. So if we are unable to, again, tend to our mental and emotional well-being, then it just makes it so much easier to stay off course spiritually, which then obviously affects too, like your day-to-day life here as well. Thank you all for sharing. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to cover briefly, this is definitely there's a lot of depth to the causes of mental health struggles, but just to touch base on it, here are some of the reasons why, or the context as to why people may begin to struggle mentally. And then it may become more complicated for people because of these reasons. So you have external events or situations, right? So if you get into a really bad car accident, you may experience some acute stress and trauma because you just got into this really bad car accident. If you had a, very bad, nasty divorce, if you have experienced the loss of a loved one, and the list goes on. Those are examples of external events or situations that it 100% makes sense that you will struggle mentally, emotionally, and you're supposed to, if you allow me to say it that way. If you didn't, then there's other issues there. Hormonal imbalance. So sometimes, like in our brain chemistry, there's just an imbalance that's happening, especially in women. You see this a lot in females, that when your hormones are not as balanced as they should be, that internally also affects their mental health as well. Your genetic makeup. So if you have family members, parents, grandparents, and so forth who have their own mental health struggles, especially those that can be diagnosed, then it makes you more, it puts you at a higher risk to also experience mental health struggles as well. And then your neurological and cognitive wiring. And what I mean by that is that's a very complicated, but simply what I want to share now is that basically some people's minds are, for a variety of reasons, which most of us probably, I will argue, it's wired to think negatively. It's wired to concentrate on the bad things. It's wired to talk bad to ourselves. And when your brain is wired that way, then it does cause the need for rewiring and reframing, but that takes work. But when you recognize that, like, for some people, it's just like really, really more strong within them to have this automatic negative mindset or automatic way of viewing their situations, and sometimes it's even illogical or, not, there's no like reason behind it. But yeah, the way that they are viewing certain situations comes from the way that their brain is wired, which all of these things can play into each other. So sometimes people's life events feeds into the reason why they have this like malfunction cognitive wiring, or because you have like a hormonal imbalance, or because you're predisposed to, genetically to certain situations, or certain diagnoses and things like that, mental health wise, then it all affects the way that you can be mental, in regards to your mental health and well-being. So again, this is more complicated, but I wanted to point this out, and I think it's important to think about the triggers or the reasons why your mental health could be struggling as well, whether it's internally or externally. Yes, so that's an example of, yes, the way that generational trauma can speak to the external events, that can speak to the genetic makeup. And when generational trauma is happening, that means that it's taking place in each generation and certain things are repeating itself. your brain has a way of developing in order to, basically as a defense mechanism or as a way to be protective, but those things can be maladaptive or like a bad adaptation or dysfunctional. So when that happens, like for example, if someone is growing up in an abusive home, then when they hear yelling, for example, right? When they hear yelling, then their brain automatically like flips into, oh, we need to like either fight, flight, or freeze, right? So sometimes like with kids, like working in the schools that I worked in, when there's a lack of structure, when they may hear like elevation in the voice or whatever, they then kind of go into this automatic state of like, oh, I need to defend myself, protect myself, so they may shut down, right? Or they may start yelling, right? Or they may start crying, whatever it may be. So yes, that it does go hand in hand. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to switch gears and we are going to elaborate on what is self-care. So self-care is the practice of taking care of your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of your life. And this is obviously to promote your own health and wellness. Self-care and restoration go hand in hand. Self-care and restoration is about staying connected to God. That is the way that I view it. When I think that self-care, along with like paying attention to our mental and emotional being, I also think that self-care is also one of the other first things to go, or one of the first things that we put on the back burner. And self-care doesn't have to be this like, I don't know, I think for some people, I know for me, sometimes when I hear self-care, my mind goes to like the big thing, right? So, oh, I'm taking myself on a spa day, or, you know, I'm going on a trip or a vacation and things like that. Self-care is, you know, very simply put, is how are you taking care of yourself day to day, moment to moment, and or especially in the times that you do recognize that your mental health is struggling. And when you're able to take care of yourself, then that helps to cultivate and create room for God to restore you. So I think it's important to link self-care and restoration together. And again, in understanding that because God cares for you, like you should also care for yourself. And it's okay to care for yourself. And self-care isn't being selfish. We're going to get into some of the practical ways to engage in self-care. One of them is setting boundaries with people. That's not selfish. If you need to set those boundaries to take care of you, then that is what you need to do, you should do, and that's valid and that's okay. So yes, we'll talk more about those practical ways. And then being intentional about self-care creates protective factors and increases favorable outcomes. And when I say favorable outcomes, that does not mean that everything will go your way or it will be ideal. But when I say favorable outcomes, I mean that through like a God lens and a faith sense that we believe that God works all things together for our good, right? So to our human eye, it may be hard, right? One thing I can think about is if you have a loved one who may have been, diagnosed with cancer or something like that, and you've been praying and believing that God was going to heal them, and then that the healing doesn't come because they pass away. It's, being able to have a certain, going back to your mindset, the way that you're perceiving, the way that you're posturing yourself, and viewing that situation in Christ and faith, then you're able to take on a different viewpoint, which then will help you to see that, yes, like these are the quote unquote favorable or the things that God would have for me to get out of this situation. And you can only do that, foster that, if you're taking care of yourself, that self-care throughout the situation. Another personal example for this, a more recent example, is I think First Lady put out a prayer for my son here at the church, but my son, back in August, a couple months ago, he had this really bad migraine. It was very random. He's only 9. He had this really bad migraine and lost his ability to walk. Lost his ability to stand and walk. He was in so much pain in his legs. Just very scary. The doctors couldn't really like fine tune or pinpoint what was happening, what was going on. So as you just can imagine, as a parent, as a mom, like it was just a very hard time, a trying time. But it was during that time that I had to, the one thing that helped me through it, and I know, is that I remained in a certain position in terms of, how I was doing mentally and emotionally. That does not mean I was doing well. There was a lot of nights that I was crying, I was struggling, I was worried, and all of the above. But what I was able to do is I was able to take it to God, right? One, and then he was able to help me in those moments, literally moment by moment, and restore me, restore my faith, restore my hope, restore my little bit of joy. And then also too, just being able to take care of myself during those moments. So whether that was like calling people to talk about it or allowing myself to be angry in a non-destructive way, but allowing myself to like release that anger, because I was like, there's a lot of things to be angry about. And it was just, so many things. But I know that, and praise God, like he is walking now. So he's doing well, yes. But it was during that time that, and that's when First Lady reached out to me and asked me to present on, like, at this conference, she said the thing was restoration. It was something that was actually on my heart, because there has never been a time more than that moment where I had to literally depend on God, what I felt like moment by moment, to ask him to essentially restore me day by day. But then doing those like certain things, allowing people to be there for us, that was like a form of self-care during those moments. And there was like just a lot of different things that I was doing to help myself so that I can show up, right, for my son, so that I can continue to show up for my other children, so that I can work. I had to take off of work, right, so that I can come back. So there's different things that are important for you to be able to basically build up your own toolbox. And you'll add to it, right, throughout your life. But build up your own toolbox so you can know what are things that I'm doing self-care-wise on a day-to-day basis, what are things that I'm doing when I notice that my mental health is struggling, and then also what are things that I'm doing just, overall to help you to maintain a certain posture in God so that you don't forget where your help essentially comes from. Actually, I'm going to go back. Okay, I'm going to give you guys 1 minute. Can you share with the person next to you what are some of your self-care strategies? Twenty more seconds. All right, if we can all come back together. All right, we're going to all come back together. Thank you guys for sharing your self-care practices. I want you guys to keep those in mind as we continue through the presentation. Because again, I want you to think about building up a toolbox, a menu, so that you can have a list of self-care strategies that you can use when you need it. And you can go to the next slide. And actually, we're going to skip past this slide because we kind of talked about this, the call to restoration, just understanding that, you know, God desires to restore our peace, our purpose, our emotional balance. He cares about those things. So being in position for restoration. So we're going to cover 3 parts. So our perspective, our posture, and our practice. Next slide. So perspective is about taking on the God lens. So challenges are opportunities to see through faith and not fear, right? To see through, you can add some other things, to see through faith and not despair, to see through faith and not anger, not resentment. So when we are having this perspective, it helps to give us the endurance, the hope that we need in order to go through those challenging times, the hard times, the tough times. And it increases our ability to have more tolerance for the hard things as well. So a lot of times what I see with people when they're going through difficulties, at least, you know, well, I guess, yeah, working with clients, personal and all of the above, is that we either try to like avoid it, we perseverate on it, right? We worry about it, we keep thinking about it, we go into like super problem solving mode, we try to fix it, or then we become very frustrated by it. But we also must remember to make the conscious choice to turn to God during these moments. So again, He is our Father. He cares for us. He wants to help us. And think again, when we think about perspective, go back to that glass half empty, half full. What is helpful? What is unhelpful? When you're able to have the proper perspective, this helps you to be in position for restoration. And you can go to the next slide, please. The second point is our posture. So this is our focus, right? So when we are able to focus on God and not the storm. And when I think about this, is like literally visualizing myself turning away from the thing that is before me, and then making sure I'm turning myself to God. So whether that's in reading my word, whether that's, going into like listening to my praise and worship songs, whether that's going to listen to certain sermons or topics that talk about the thing that I'm going through, but being able to shift your focus from, the focus of like, what's wrong, what is challenging, what the issue is, and literally reminding yourself to turn your focus to God. That helps you in order to be, again, in position for the restoration. So a good reflection point here is thinking about what drains you versus what's restoring you, right? So as you're going through certain things in your life and you're thinking about, you're doing those check-ins with yourself and you're thinking about, what am I doing in order to, in addressing this issue, or how am I going through it? Think about, are the things you're doing, is it draining you or is it restoring you? Okay, we can go to the next slide. We'll dive in a little deeper on that point later on. And then the third point of being in position for restoration is practice. So these are some daily habits, some self-care things, and some of these things we've already covered. And then I also think it's important to identify things that you may already be doing to help yourself. So there's one thing to do something and you're quote unquote just doing it, but it's another thing when you're doing something and then you have an understanding of, I'm doing this and it's helpful in this way. So I just feel like it gives some power to it. But prayer and worship, that is definitely a form of self-care, daily habits. Rest, making sure that you're resting, you're integrating rest into your rhythm. If you don't rest, you become burnt out. And if you become burnt out, then it makes you more susceptible to experience all of the, some of the mental health symptoms. So making sure that you're resting. Community and fellowship. So making sure that you are connected, well connected, having people, whether it's like small groups, whether it's your family, a church community, different things that you are doing, your friend groups, making sure that you're staying connected with people. God created people to need people in certain ways. So when we're not around people, then that creates isolation and, some other things start brewing there. Boundaries and balance. This is another big one. Again, with boundaries, being able to set boundaries proactively, and then knowing how to set boundaries intermittently in the moments when you need to is very key. When you don't set boundaries, then you're not speaking for your time. You're not speaking for your standards that you may have or your expectations. And when you're not doing that, that's when a lot of times we see the anxiety, we see the anger, the irritability setting in. So when you're able to set your boundaries with people and things, that puts you into position of taking care of yourself. And then finding a balance. That's a word that I use frequently in the work that I do, because, that's just what life is. The life that we have is a mixture of all the things. There's good, there's bad, there's pretty, there's ugly, there's hard, there's easy, and so forth. So it's not good if, we stay all the way on the negative side, right? And we're living in this world of defeat. But it's unrealistic to think that you're going to have a life where you're happy and bliss all of the time and nothing bad is happening. So being able to have that balanced mindset and knowing how to think emotionally and logically and bring them together is also key. Physical movement is another example of self-care. So being able to take walks or exercise, or just moving around, that creates so much positive energy. There's so much science behind the link between our ability to move and our and our mental well-being. And then eating, sleeping, and drinking well. Those are the three things that I always will check in with people, is make sure that you're eating decently. I'm not myself, I don't eat perfectly all the time, but if you're not being mindful of your diet in some way, that can affect your mental health. Sleeping as much as you can, trying to get adequate sleep, and then drinking your water. That is very important. It gives you, it just gives you a good foundation, right? If you weren't doing those things, it makes the hard things harder when you don't have certain things in place. So those are some daily habits for self-care. Next slide, please. Do you have something specific in mind? Or you just mean a general example? Yeah. So setting boundaries. When I think of setting boundaries, I think of setting limits, being able to say no. Or I think those are the two things, right? And then I think it's also important to have your own expectation or standard in mind. So I'm trying to think of a good boundary. Maybe at the workplace, right? I guess a personal example, I remember at one of my jobs, my supervisor said to me, oh, I need you to be able to work after hours because of the type of job you have and the population we work with and X, Y, and Z. And I had to set a boundary and say, no, I have children, young children at home. I can't give that to you, but what I can do is this. right? So it's being able to hold firm to, and it's just knowing, like, you know, if I were to do that, would it cost me something, right? And so, but I feel like a lot of time where I see people struggle the most is in relationships, interpersonally, where a lot of, like, someone is giving of themselves so much, and then they're not really getting anything in return, but then you just keep giving, and it's for a variety of different reasons, right? Because you want to help your person, you love that person, you think that, oh, if I keep doing this, then it'll change, or whatever it may be. And even thinking about, you know, as Christians, we think like we should be givers, but you also are supposed to be wise, right? So it's just being able to, like, think about, you know, being able to be aware of what your standards, expectations are, what your needs are, and if I were to engage in this kind of relationship in this way or do this thing, is it going to cost me? Is it going to cause me to go into the red? Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yes. Mm. Yeah, you okay if can I answer the question? Yeah, okay, okay. Yes, so finding a therapist, I think the internet is a great place to start because there's all kind of information on there. One website is Psychology Today, and if you put in, you put in a search and certain things that you're looking for that you want, so, you know, certain demographics or whatever it may be, then they'll give you options. Another place is to check in with your PCP. They oftentimes will have a list. If you have insurance, calling the member service line on the back of your insurance card. Actually, sometimes they even have a mental health line, behavioral health, that you can call. They have case managers usually who can help you as well. But yeah, I think those are like the first 3 steps. And I would say, you know, just have an idea. I like to encourage people to have an idea of what you're looking for, what you think you may be looking for in a therapist. And then while you're doing your search, throw that out there. You do have to be mindful of, you know, insurance or if you're self-pay and different things like that. But you put that out there, what you're looking for, and then you do have to look and search. Sometimes it's easy. A lot of times it's not. A lot of places are like backed up. There could be a waiting list and all of that. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about therapy, that even just searching and looking for one, and if you're put on someone's wait list, you at least have the process started. And then I like to remind people that therapy is like it's an open door and it's flexible and fluid. So, you know, it's not you walking into a certain thing, but it's you being able to go to someone who you feel comfortable with, who you have a rapport with, and they create a space for you, and you use them as a resource for yourself. Mhm.
Okay, if these are questions, don't forget, write them down because we're going to try to get it all in. Write them down because I'm going to send someone around to collect the cards. Okay? All right.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so please write down your questions. We have more questions. I am going to, the rest of the slideshow is kind of like, I would say a recap of some of the things we already discussed. So I'm going to just power through those a little bit. And then, yes, we can definitely open the floor for questions. So barriers to restorations. So emotions driving the narrative. So when you allow your emotions to be in the driver's seat, then that, again, it takes over it basically hijacks your brain, and then you're unable to think logically and rationally. So being able to cope with your emotions, deal with your emotions, and not, like, when you recognize that you're, sad, angry, irritable, anxious, whatever those things is, don't just think it's, oh, it'll pass. Actually take time to take care of it. Burnout from over-serving. We talked about that. We talked about the isolation. When you're by yourself and you feel alone, no one likes feeling alone. And I don't mean, not to confuse having alone time, right? But feeling like you're alone in this world. That's oftentimes what isolation can create. And then also just forgetting our identity in Christ. So again, losing sight on who we are, the promises of God, right? And the fact that, all the things that we say in church, right? The victory is already won. And, that God is, like, if God is for us, who can be against us? All of those things, like, really in those hard times, remembering those things and actually holding them internally and believing and acting on them. And then we can go to, are you able to go to the slide before questions and answers? So the second to the last one. And this is just to recap what we've discussed. So as Christians, we have a God lens through which we can view life's challenges. So when we are able to take that to heart and remind ourselves that we have a helper, we have a protector, we have a provider in a supernatural way, that we can take to him our mental well-being, the state of our mental well-being, and how we're doing mentally and emotionally. And even in those moments, he will take care of us, he will help us, he will restore us. That gives us leverage, that gives us what we need to go through this life day to day. Perspective determines your position. So remembering that when we're perceiving, how we're perceiving, the way that we're thinking, sometimes may require us to reframe it in a certain way so that we can be in position for the restoration that God provides. And then again, we are guaranteed victory through Jesus, and God sustains us through every storm, through the restoration. So if you ever you find yourself at your wit's end and you're ever questioning, like, how am I going to get through this? Turn to God and remember that he is able and he wants to restore you, and that is how you will get through the hard times, the tough times. So our emotions may shift, but God's faithfulness, it does not. And remember that restoration is an ongoing process as we walk with him. So it's not something that you need only when things are really bad. Like, you will help yourself if you foster a relationship and foster habits of self-care, which is linked to restoration, so that when you do need it most, it's easy to access, it's easy to do. And yeah, now we can open the floor for questions, more questions.
Okay. The first question is, do you personally have a list of therapists that you would recommend? So do you personally, or do, and Dr. Mingo, or, and Christine, I know that you have a lot of connections. Do any of you have personal therapists that you would recommend? And if so, would you be willing to share them?
So, it's kind of a hard question, only because the ones I recommend typically don't have availability. So I have a group practice, and I have hand selected my therapists with intentionality. So it's easy for me to say, like, yes, I do have some therapists in-house that I recommend. I also have another close connection, Living in Confidence, and that's ran by Michelle Cooley and Shatona Hollingsworth. So that's a good place to turn to. And I'm trying to think of some other ones who may have some open availability. I don't know if anyone else has any recommendations. Living in Confidence. Bridging the Gap Services.
Mauri, do you have any cards with you?
I
have actually. There are some cards on the board, the cork board outside of my office. I have some cards pinned on that board. If anyone is interested, they're up there to be taken. Okay.
Yeah, and what I can do is, I don't mind doing this. First Lady, can I send you a list of therapists? Yeah, I'll email her a list of places.
And then I can email it to the WAP e-blast, the SHOTIME e-blast, and just send it out. If you don't want it, ditch it, and it'll be there for those who want it. Okay. Thank you. Can you have more than one at a time? And what they're referring to, Mauri, is causes of mental health struggles. Can you have more than one?
Yeah, certainly. Typically, that's how it is. I would say that it's very rare that you're only struggling with just one. And again, a way that I would encourage people to think about it is, how do I want to say this? Like, think about when you're hungry. Like, if you're really hungry, if you haven't eaten all day, your belly's going to be growling, you're probably going to have a headache, you're going to be irritable, like you're going to have multiple symptoms. When I'm teaching kids, what I like to say is signals. Like, think of it as signals, like your body is telling you, like, hey, we need something. So your symptoms of mental health, it's supposed to be there to alert you, to say, like, hey, something's off, we don't like this, I'm feeling really anxious or overwhelmed, or I'm feeling really sad. So it's important to think of it as, like, what are the multiple symptoms that I'm experiencing, so that you can kind of, like, make sense of, like, what it is that is going on with you.
And you can also send me a copy of your PowerPoint, and then I can, because that was a question too, and then I can send that out as well.
Okay.
Another question, Mauri, is how can you get help for an adult that can't let go of the past and that has depression?
For an adult that can't let go in the past, so like for themselves or on someone else's behalf?
For that person.
Yeah, that can't let go of the past. Yeah, I think that And I was actually in I was showing her that it was in one of my slides that we skipped over. I think prayer and therapy is great, right? So like, I never want to lose sight as a Christian and as a therapist. I never want to lose sight what, my own personal convictions is. I believe that if you take things to God, He will and can help you. I think that that's where the true healing comes from. But I also think therapy is there to help you in practice. And especially when we think about like the human life that we have to live, to help you to process, explore, work through, let go, identify, to know what's happening. It's different when you have someone looking in on your situation, right? Someone who's on the outside versus someone that's in it. When you're in it, you get caught up, right? And it causes you to lose certain perspectives. But going to someone, talking to someone could help you in therapy to be able to take a step back. They're along with you on the journey, and then you guys just unpack what has happened, what has transpired, so that you can eventually get on the other side of it, which is a process, right? It's a journey.
The next question is, how do you differentiate self-care and masking mental health struggles, i.e., a comfort snack or comfort show overcompensating and your outlet has seemingly overtaken you?
That's a really, really good question. Yeah. So my answer to that is, I believe that's where you have to ask yourself the question, is this helping me or is this unhelpful? Is this causing me to avoid, right? Or is it really like just a mechanism or a tool I'm using in this moment to help me to regulate or to calm or cope? If it's something that we a lot of times can become, I don't want to say addicted, but we can become hooked on certain behaviors that we think like, oh, just because I'm looking, the phone is a big thing now. Just because I'm on my phone for hours, I'm just, what the term is doom scrolling. I'm just scrolling. It's not harming anyone, but you're not helping yourself either if that's all you're doing. So making sure you have a variety of things that you're doing. Yeah, you want to get a comfort snack. You want to eat a bowl of ice cream one night, fine. But if you're doing that for a month, that's not good. So going back to that word balance, like making sure you're having a balance in what you're doing. And then if you find yourself having difficulty not doing that thing, then that's when you know, like, okay, this is probably not helping me.
How do you handle accepting mental diagnosis and accepting you need the assistance of medication? How to reframe when you don't have a strong Bible understanding? How to know if you're setting boundaries or a personal relationship? There's a lot of questions on here. Let's deal with the first one. How to handle accepting a mental health diagnosis and accepting that you need the assistance of medication.
Yeah, I think that the sister here gave a powerful just illustration. If you went to the doctor and they said, hey, we're listening to your lungs and you have pneumonia, you're not going, you're going to take that seriously 9 times out of 10. So 9.9 times out of 10. So if you go to a provider, which I always encourage you go to a great provider. Just don't go to any provider, because are some providers that will try to throw like diagnoses and labels and different things who aren't taking like the full context and everything into consideration. But if you are with a great provider and after some time and evaluation, they say, hey, we're looking at this diagnosis for you, I would say that trusting that this is it's a medical diagnosis. There is certain criteria, just like in the physical sense, the doctors have certain criteria that has to be met in order for them to give the diagnosis. It's the same thing for mental health providers. There's certain criteria that has to be met. So we're not just going to give you, like, for example, it's actually a lot harder to get a generalized like anxiety disorder diagnosis rather than me saying, hey, this person has adjustment mixed with anxiety, right? Like, there's certain things that has to be met, and a good provider will make sure that you're meeting that before they give you the diagnosis. So trusting that it is like a good, thorough medical diagnosis. And then also with the medication piece, if they're recommending medication, then again, making sure that you trust that provider, that you're feeling good about them, and then making sure that they are starting you out with the medication in a way that is safe. So usually they start at a low dose, and then they're saying, hey, we're going to check in with each other like month to month, and if you have any symptoms, adverse effects, please contact me. So again, similar to your physical health doctor, these are providers who are watching over you and making sure this medication, this diagnosis makes sense for you and it's working for you.
This will be our last question. Mauri, I thought this was a good one. How to welcome in community when you have a trauma background?
That is a good one. That's a really good one. Because when you have a trauma background, there is a certain, the trust is broken in people. And also you're going back to like cognitively, neurologically, what may have been wired in your brain on how to perceive certain social interactions and perceive interpersonal relationships may be altered. So, for example, you could have someone in your life who would be good for you, right? Whether it's a friendship, romantic relationship, or whatever it may be, but you may be on high alert, have a high sensitivity, may be like hyper vigilant about the little things. So if that person, does something, hurts you in some way, which humans are going to hurt you, right? We can't avoid that in relationships. But with your trauma background, it may be magnified and intensified, and then it keeps you away. It pushes people away. So what I would recommend is really working on your trauma, like getting to know you and yourself through the lens of your trauma, and then also being able to find an identity for yourself outside of your trauma. So then you can see yourself as someone who can have a community, who can have people around you. And like therapy, I would highly recommend therapy for someone who has a certain kind of trauma where they feel like it's hard for them to have a sense of community, because that's where you can do the work. That's where you can work on and learn those different like maladaptive or dysfunctional, certain protective factor defense mechanisms that you have in place that aren't working for you, and that's keeping the community away. So working on that, but then also like putting yourself out there a little bit and going back to that word balance. Like, if you are hurt by someone that you try to, let in a bit of sense of community with, don't cut them off immediately, right? Kind of develop a list of things that you're going to check in with yourself about, talk through with yourself, maybe talk through with another trusted person, and work on step by step, person by person, relationship by relationship, repairing and restoring and undoing what the effects of the trauma was, and relearning and re-engaging, new things that are beneficial to you in that way.
Okay, we're going to end there with Mauri's session. Thank you so much, Mauri. And prayerfully, what we're doing today is adding tools to our toolbox. This day was designed to help create spaces for us to be intentional about allowing God to begin the work of restoring us, But like we learned last night, restoration is a process. I think sometimes we want to come, we want somebody to lay hands on us, and it's instant, but it's a process. And it doesn't always feel good, but the outcome, those favorable outcomes that Mauri talked about, and I love what she said, and part of the process is just growing in your relationship with Jesus Christ. Yeah. I want to share two things. Another tool for your toolbox. I was out with some girlfriends, community, and Sonia, she leaned over. We were talking, and I don't even know if she remembers this, and we were talking about boundaries. And she said a wise person told her that I protect my peace. And because of where I was, everything that was going on, taking on so much, which we do, that resonated with me, Sonia, and I've held on to that since that day. I protect my peace, and I'm intentional about doing, and I'm unapologetically protecting my peace. Another friend, Dr. Mingo, I don't know if she remembers this, she sent me a podcast of, I forget her name, but if you say her name, watch her, follow her. And I'm not a podcast person, y'all know, and people who know me, you know I'm not on the Facebook, but I started listening to her. But the episode that she had me hooked, I'm not above backing out. I'm not above backing out, because I was always of the mindset, and if you know me, I don't make the habit of, if I commit, if it takes me out of here, I'm going to do it. But what she talked about is having the ability to reassess what's really important to you, and then having the courage, if you determine that something that you have committed to is not serving you, that you have the courage to say to that individual, you know what, I had good intentions when I took this on, but I have determined that this does not, in a loving way, serve me, and it's actually depleting me. And I did that, Dr. Mingo, I did. So I was like so proud of myself, because that was huge for me. And that was actually probably the first time I've ever done anything like that. I literally backed out of something that I committed to. I know you're all saying that's a terrible thing. No, in fact, I told you last night, I felt relieved. I felt relieved. So I just felt led to share that with you. I'm telling you, not being above backing out is something that